opportunities surrounding the Artemis program. So we heard from our very own Satoru Kurosu and Joseph Borg about how international partnerships, commercial innovation, and scientific discovery are laying the foundation for humanity's return to the lunar surface. And Glavki, sorry, I hope we're recording right now. But today we'll be building on the conversation by shifting our focus from getting to the moon to living and working on the moon. A sustained human presence won't be possible through rockets and spacecraft alone. It will require us to understand the lunar environment, learn how to use the moon's natural resources, and develop technologies that allow astronauts to produce food, recycle materials, and build resilient habitats. That's exactly what today's panel is all about. We'll be discussing lunar geology, regolith utilization, and space agriculture, three disciplines that will play a critical role in transforming short-duration missions into a permanent human presence beyond Earth. So we're incredibly fortunate today to be joined by three outstanding researchers who are helping shape that future. And I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Harrison Coker. He is a NASA Space Technology Graduate Research Fellow and one of the leads of the Moon Village Association's Lunar Agriculture and Sustainability team. Harrison research focuses on transforming lunar and Martian regolith into productive agricultural substrates by recovering nutrients, recycling waste streams, and developing sustainable food production systems for future space habitats. Through his collaborations with NASA Kennedy Space Center, he is helping develop technologies that will support long-duration human exploration of the Moon and Mars. Today, he'll also be sharing exciting results from a newly published paper or soon hopefully to be published paper that represents an important step towards understanding how the lunar agriculture and sustainability resource utilization. Harrison is also a BioAstra Fellow, working to advance innovation solutions for space biology and the future of world food production. Please join me in welcoming Harrison. Okay.
Thank you, Borja. That was too kind.
So our next speaker is Jared Long-Fox. He is a planetary exploration researcher whose work spans lunar geology, planetary resources, and technologies that will enable long-term human explorations of the moon. He's a planetary exploration research scientist in the Department of Physics at the University of Central Florida and serves as exploration lead for Lunascope, part of NASA's Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute at Brown University. Jared has also held appointments as a visiting researcher at NASA Kennedy Space Center SWAMP's Works and a visiting technologist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where he has contributed to technologies supporting planetary exploration and in situ resource utilization. Beyond his research, he is deeply involved in the broader space community, serving as a chair of the ASCE Regolith Operations, Mobility and Robotics Technical Committee, chair of the Education and Outreach of the IAA Space Resource Technologies Committee, and co-lead of the new NASA Open Science Data Repository Regolith Analysis Working Group. His work brings together geology, engineering, and space resources to help shape the future of sustainable lunar exploration. Let's give a warm welcome to Jared.
Thank you, Borja. Hi, everyone. I look forward to this very much.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Richard Barker, a scientist at Purdue University and a member of the NASA Science Definition Team for NASA's Lunar Effects on Agricultural Flora, or most commonly known as LEAF, experiment due for deployment on the lunar surface during Artemis. He's also a lead of the NASA Open Science Data Repository Plant Analysis Working Group, helping coordinate the interpretation of plant biology-related data. He started his career at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he led numerous NASA-funded spaceflight and bioinformatics projects, including making a tool called Mango to analyze microbes, and TOS, a tool that integrated multiomics data from plant space biology. Then during his time at Jury Gravity, he led a data analysis and space biology research team before working for the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science at the NASA Ames Open Science Data Repository. He's also the co-founder and CEO of the Collaborative Science Environment, an organization developing clinostats, random positioning machines, and other accessible research technologies for scientists, educators, and students. In his spare time, he loves to play in the garden with his two sons and dogs. Let's welcome Richard. All right. And before I start asking individual questions, I will first like to ask a very general question, which I think everybody will be interested to hear your opinion. So, Artemis has been often described as the beginning of a sustained lunar presence rather than a series of exploration missions. What do you think makes this new era fundamentally different from Apollo? And Richard, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think key difference is the Apollo missions were the most awesome camping trips humanity's ever done. But the goal of Artemis is not to just like visit, it's to stay. It's to work out a way to live off the land and build something truly sustainable. There's different models for doing that based on which agencies are involved. But yeah, that's the key difference. We're going to stay. It's not just a camping trip this time.
Yeah. So, Harrison, what is the achievement regarding this new era of exploration that Richard is referring to? What is the achievement that you will most likely like to see accomplished over the next decade as Artemis continues to expand?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think Richard said it was a camping trip, which is the perfect way to put it, right? It was extremely exciting to start seeing the moon-based developments roll out this summer and the different phases for the operations that they're going to do, because it's really like, okay, we're not just going camping, we're really thinking about where our resources need to be and how we can get there to really make something happen. So it's I believe going to happen as long as we can stick to that schedule. I mean, I believe that, there's going to be a moon base.
That's awesome. So, Jared, what about you? What makes you the most exciting about this new Artemis program?
Well, it Moonbase gets me excited. So a lot of my research is geotechnical, actually how infrastructure would work on the moon, how we interact with the regolith. So I'm a bit biased in that, but trying to be a bit more objective. Before Moonbase was announced in the ignition event by Administrator Isaacman, um, there was a lot of talk about that we were going to do all these things, but I personally, and this is not the opinion of my organization, this is all just me. I felt that there was a bit of a lack of definite direction, and there was a lot of good things being said, but there wasn't a how. I think that with Moonbase, everything is a lot more tangible, and to me the exciting part about Moonbase, yes, that's a cool thing to do, but the ability to actually work, operate, and depend less on Earth for our scientific exploration efforts. I think that is the hallmark of all of this. In my mind, we're doing all of this to kind of work towards that Star Trek-like future where we don't need to come back to Earth. We can do everything on our own where we're at while being good stewards of every environment we encounter. So I look forward to figuring out how we can do all of that on our nearest cosmological neighbor, I guess. I
Wow.
think that will be the biggest achievement.
Fantastic answers from all of you guys. And Jared, let me stick with you because you bring a very unique geological perspective to this to this webinar today. So, and from a geological perspective, what makes different regions of the moon unique? And especially now that you were talking about moon bases, why does that matter for selecting future landing sites and habitats?
Great question. So the moon is a lot less geologically diverse than Earth. There's only a couple of hundred mineral species as opposed to Earth, we have thousands. On Earth, we have this nice atmosphere that we breathe with lots of wind activity, water activity. We actually have active plate tectonics. The moon is a bit more geologically dead. Internally, we suspect, and its surface evolves a lot slower. Those processes that act on the surface are a lot different. Micrometeorite and occasionally larger impacts, radiation, electromagnetics, what have you. But the geology, even though it is in terms of mineralogy a little bit simpler, air quotes simpler than on Earth, we need to know how these materials behave. For example, the lunar highlands regolith is going to behave differently than Mare. If you're near a pyroclastic vent, you're going to have probably more glassy stuff that impacts how wheels interact with your regolith, or how it compacts, what kind of loads it can bear, construction, moon base relevant things. Depending on where you're at, such as near permanently shadowed regions, PSRs, you're more likely to get concentrations of water ice, which we have never directly measured in situ, but we sent L-Cross a while ago, about over a decade ago, to actually crash and measure water ice. And we think there's water ice in some of these permanently shadowed regions in concentrations that would be worth us going after for propellant, for human use, and stuff like that. So I don't consider, I guess what I'm saying is I don't consider the geology just the rock. It's the whole natural environment of any location that you need to consider. How much illumination you have. You can't have your astronauts freezing or solar panels not collecting the sun, so you need to be somewhere with sun. But you want to be close enough to resources that you need, such as water ice, and the local geology ends up playing into that. Just like here on Earth, when we build a city, when we make even a small outpost in the forest or on some scientific expedition in the middle of a jungle, you don't just set up anywhere, you pick the right spot. And on the moon, the cost of it takes a lot to pick the right spot. We don't have the data, in my opinion, to pick that right spot right now. And we can't, as with NASA as a steward of the taxpayer dollars, NASA's not going to just throw millions and billions at picking the wrong spot and just trying something somewhere. So the environment, the geology, it is critical for all of this, and it does vary from site to site on the moon, just like it does on Earth.
Wow, I love that answer. So Jared was just mentioning, obviously, that we still need more data to pick, so to speak, the best position for a habitat. But let's assume that we have brilliant people like Jared working on it, and we pick the correct placement for a habitat and a moon base. So Richard, let's once we have that achieved, that we have selected a specific section for a habitat. Uh, what technology or demonstration will give you the confidence that biological life support systems are ready for deployment on the moon?
Well, that's hard because like NASA will probably not allow for biological life support systems. They're going to almost inevitably insist in all being physiochemical, and that any of the integration of biology into the system is merely a bonus or a buffer. Botanists like me always imagine like a huge moon base where like plants are an integral part of the biogenerative life support system, a bit like they tried in Biosphere 2, right? But the reality of it is going to be small boxes glued together, right? So the technologies that are needed are both a combination of hardware and crops. It's going to need both engineers and biologists to work together and to create integrated products that work, and not just on Earth, but in areas like the moon where we have lower gravity. So we have altered convective mixing of gases. So it's likely there's going to be larger boundary areas. So we need to make sure that the hardware can adjust the airflow to make sure that gravity is not an issue. We have to make sure that the hardware also takes into account the electromagnetic field or lack of. Life has always had that. So you might be able to treat that as a biological issue or a hardware issue. Can the hardware produce a force field like in Star Trek? Or do we need to tweak certain proteins and the way that they hold electrons in their mineral ions in order to make sure they continue to donate those electrons into electron transport chain systems in environments that don't have the Earth's background electromagnetic field? Those are kind of like the quantum and hardware like challenges that the biology and the hardware are going to encounter together. And so we see like we need like integrated systems that have both engineered and tailored hardware and crops. So essentially what I'm alluding to is it depends on the purpose of the base, right? If the purpose of the base is to essentially just as a stepping stone to launch, to get fuel, to launch people to Mars, The infrastructure that you build there would be different. It would be more similar to, say, like when the US were moving troops to Guam during World War II, and they made some islands where they had hydroponic systems produce food for the astronauts en route. It's just like a stepping stone. The sort of infrastructure and tools that you need for that, like stepping stone to Mars, are different relative to the goal of making the moon the goal, the moon the prize, and thus investing in a larger human-centric design where we do build plants and biology into every room to keep the psychological support that we need to live so far away from home. So I crossed over a few different areas there and basically said that there's many opportunities. There isn't one silver bullet that's going to make it possible. And some of the challenges, like some of these like quantum ones related to like electromagnetic fields and the increased prevalence of intergalactic cosmic rays, are things that are really hard to research on Earth. And so some of those early experiments are going to be exploratory. They are going to be experimental so we can like quantify some of those threats and risks before really narrowing down on how that lunar base is going to grow and how humanity's perspective, not just one government's, is going to influence that final village design. So I'll leave it there. There's a few loose ends, but it's a good animation for the team.
Yeah. So, and let me follow up with you on one of those questions, because Richard, you have a tremendous amount of experience in plant space biology. So, what are some of those barriers that those crops that you were mentioning for the moon base are going to encounter on the moon? You mentioned already the lack of electromagnetic field, but what else? What other effects will you happen to see on those plants that are first grown on that moon base?
Well, the other one that most surprised me that I learned when joining the Leaf Team project was the atmospheric exploration atmosphere. So essentially, when humans go to the moon, it's so they can do those awesome extracurricular activities. They can dance around practicing the moonwalk on the lunar surface and taking those awesome selfies and doing all the mining and geology and all the important science that Jared and Harrison have been discussing very scientifically. But in order for them to do those extravehicular activities, that means the atmospheres that they have inside the spacesuit has to be half bar pressure. So how a scuba diver would say it. So like 56 kPa. And so what this means is all the Artemis missions were at half bar pressure. And when you look at the various plans that NASA have for future missions, again, they always talk about it being at half bar pressure, this lower partial pressure. And that would be the same for all the habitats. So this isn't too bad for humans. They realized that as you lower the air pressure, if you increase the partial pressure of oxygen within that, then humans can function like more or less pretty fine, right? But studies from the University of Guelph, coordinated from the University of Florida, Bob Furr and Lisa Paul and their colleagues, have done some low pressure studies where they've shown there are many gene expression changes and physiological consequences to that reduced pressure. Essentially, they start to activate the insect response system, which overlaps very directly with their work on the plant response to true lunar regolith, which is also part activates the insect defense response system. So there's a double whammy that these two different environmental factors, the partial pressure and what it can do to gene expression, appears to have a similar effect to what the exposure to true regolith did. So if you combine those two, you can imagine a sort of synergistic or like antagonistic response if we add those multiple stresses together. So the partial pressure for me was the surprising thing. And so I'm now fascinated by high altitude agriculture. I know that NASA is sending researchers to many of these kind of remote areas for both astrobiology and space biology applications. It's kind of different. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Over.
Yeah, and if somebody knows what happens to plants in every realm of space, that will be you. So Harrison, moving on to you, and actually I'm going to start with a question that Doc Plata asked you, and especially since you have experience with SpaceX flight hardware. I think Nate Gross is here. You just recently have a very cool SpaceX Starfall demo flight. But SpaceX plans for Starship to land as much of 100 tons on the lunar surface, Doc Plata says. An inflatable habitat of that mass will have a footprint of 50 meters by 50 meters by 10 meters. Is anyone that you know of working on lunar agriculture at that scale in support of a very large international lunar base? So that I thought that was a very good question. Harrison, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Doug, for that question. I think that that's like a great observation is the scale that we're going to be operating at because we as scientists, whether we want to use simulants or like, we'll use the tiniest amounts to sort of look at some of, the structural properties of these simulants or, like we grow plants and they're like, a centimeter or two tall because we're operationally quite constrained, but SpaceX it's like is about to land this behemoth on the moon, right? Um, I don't know of anyone that is operating even close to that scale, right? So there was Texas A&M Space Facility was going to be like an acre of lunar regolith, but they're pretty robotics only, no biology, no agriculture. I really think one of the most, and I sort of was a big champion of this as I'm like finishing my PhD, but like we have to really go big. And when we study plant growth in regolith, we cannot just like use a pot study as our basis for like the productivity of plants grown in simulants. Like we really need fields, right? So yeah, I absolutely am a huge champion of this. I mean, if honestly, if I could do anything with my research trajectory right now, I would love to have like a large indoor closed facility where we could have these crops grown. We can monitor gases. We can monitor like soil genesis over time, right? Like the soil forming factors that are absent on the moon. Like that would be awesome for me. So unfortunately, no. If you want to write a Texas, Space Commission grant or something, I think that we need to do that.
Offer sent for sure. And Harrison, I'll stick with you because you mentioned lunar regolith as a way to grow plants. So what is special about growing plants on lunar regolith? Why is it an alternative to what Richard Barker was mentioning about maybe hydroponic setup? Obviously, you are a complete expert, and I think you are probably the best fitted person to grow plants on lunar regolith that I've ever seen. So Harrison, go ahead and take that answer
Oh,
answer those questions.
I don't know about that, Borja, but I appreciate it a lot. I like to play around with it for sure. I was fortunate to have very large quantities of simulants to work with. So, I think it's interesting, that the main problem that we have with like our lunar regolith on the moon, like the genuine stuff, is that we really cannot replicate this agglutinate fraction very well. And I see Jared shaking his head. Like, I think that this is like super wide standing issue that we have as scientists. Now, I would imagine that a glutamate fraction is probably quite unreactive, but we could be. You're shaking your head. Yeah, I would love to hear your input on this.
No, it's going to be fairly reactive. There's nanophase iron. It is nasty stuff. It is not, you're right. It's glassy, so it's not mineral chemistry that we're working with. But I don't have data on this, and I'm no lunar chemist. But from what I've seen, I would expect the nanophase, the agglutinin particles to present a toxicity hazard above and beyond that of of just the pure minerals
For
themselves.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's that whole component of it, like up to like 70% of the regolith that we don't know very well, right? But like yeah, like Jared was saying, like we believe that it could present some toxicity issues, but like until we do it, I don't think that we're gonna advance our knowledge. I think that we're at a point where it's like, honestly, let's go there, let's demonstrate some like let's grow plants in lunar regolith and like let's see what happens. I mean, we can return it back to the earth, but then it gets oxidized and like all this stuff starts happening. Like let's do it there where I'm at.
So Harrison, what will be then why is it better than hydroponics?
Well, there's a like core human spirit about growing a plant in soil. Like I think that is so important to not look beyond the fact of yes, we can do things totally artificially and we should. Like we shouldn't rely on just one system. But if we want to like evolve, like if we want to call the moon our home, we cannot just be surrounded by these totally artificial environments. Like if we want to own this place, we really have to develop and like bring ourselves to it. And there was nothing more core to human development than like the agricultural revolution. I think Laura Fackrell says that in her like how to use regolith simulants paper, but that's why we should use regolith. I mean, apart from that, it is a potential nutrition source. It can help facilitate and sort of cycle out like air contaminants and that sort of thing, if you want a scientific answer. But it's a heart thing for me.
Yeah, so there's definitely, as Richard mentioned, there's a psychological benefit of seeing your plant grow on an item, right? So and I fully agree. Like we have grown plants on the International Space Station, and from time to time you hear these stories about the hardware breaking, right? So if you are dependent on those crops to grow for your own moon base, you definitely need plan B, plan C, plan D, whatever those are, right? And just one hardware will not fit all, that's for sure. So I really like that answer, Harrison. And I know that is something our working group on the MBA is tackling too, what places of the moon this could happen. But now going into this,
Like quick comment on that.
yeah,
Concept.
absolutely, Richard, please.
And the concept of building soil is also intrinsic to human exploration. There's this wonderful anthropological study from Brazil where looked at the First Nations people that went across the Amazon basin. Essentially, what they showed is if you remove all the jungle, you can see these islands amongst the tributaries to the Amazon basin. And those islands were essentially where they'd done swidden agriculture. So micro scale slash and burn, where they'd make clearings in the woods, and the trees that they put down into the regolith, which was, well, it's soil, but it's very red soil, like a bit like the surface of Mars because it's ancient and heavily oxidized. And what they showed was by putting the biochar into the ground, they could then make these little gardens that have increased biodiversity, lots of fruits they could harvest, and then they could move to the next island and start to produce their new community. And so essentially, in order for humans to spread across that traditionally kind of alien environment of the Amazon basin when they were first getting there, they had to build soil in different places to build communities. And so when we look about exploring this next frontier, like the lunar surface, we look back to some of these like ancient communities and ask what lessons can we learn from them? And what we learn from this story is the importance of building soil in order to create like a permanent community. So I just wanted to kind of Harrison's comments got me really excited. It reminded me of this anthropological study, and I just kind of wanted to reflect on the knowledge of the ancestors and say how his comments were kind of rooted in that, and just wanted to share that over. So, Baka, back to you, buddy.
No, thank you, Richard, for those comments. I love them. And Jared, now following up, especially on regolith as a substrate to grow plants, and maybe how it's needed not just for growing crops, but also like almost as a psychological feature, right? But let's talk about this from a lunar geology. How can lunar geology help us determine the best location for future agricultural regolith growth, water extraction, and potential infrastructure? You already mentioned infrastructure, but I'm just curious about your vision on this.
Yeah, so I'll defer to Harrison as the main plant guy, but I'm far from ignorant on this myself. But he mentioned that it is a potential nutrient source. Now, to grow plants, you need certain proportions of different elements in your growing medium to have them healthy. If you have too much one thing, like aluminum, which the lunar highlands regolith is very rich in, that can be toxic. If you have too little magnesium or phosphorus, you're not getting nutrients. If you have too much phosphorus, you're burning your plant's roots and stuff like this. So actually understanding the composition of where you're at, if you're trying to do regolith-based agriculture, understanding the zones of the moon, and it will vary from site to site. So not every highland site, not everywhere on the lunar South Pole is going to have the exact same mineralogy or bulk chemical composition. So we need to understand that to optimize where we should go. Now, if we can find a place that there's never going to be anywhere with the perfect mineralogy for this. There's going to need to be, like a lot of the work Harrison is doing, amendments to actually understand how to grow plants in this. There needs to be amendments, different fertilizers, bacterial cultures, what have you. But you can optimize how much of that work you have to do if you get closer to your ideal composition in the lunar regolith. And if you're next to water, somewhere where you can readily access water ice and process ice laden regolith to actually extract that water, that's going to be a very good thing. So from that standpoint, it's a composition and geologic history / illumination thing. Which there's a question from Doug in the Q&A. Isn't the right spot for a moon base next to one of the peaks of eternal light?
Oh, there you
Maybe,
go. Yeah.
maybe. I actually posed that the right spot for a moon base may not actually be at the lunar South Pole, but we don't need to go there.
Good, good. And I'm glad that you answered that question of Doc Platt about the Peaks of Eternal Light as a correct placement. And there's actually quite a bit of questions now in the Q&A that I'm going to probably ask Richard and Harrison, especially one that is coming from our good friend Colin Lennox. And I think this will solve some of the questions. That's what I'm seeing from Doug as well as from Jose. Uh, could the panelists comment on regolith processing prior to plant growth to build custom solids or ameliorate certain impacts related to heavy metals? Thanks, because as Harrison mentioned, some of that toxicity could come from the plant uptake in some of those heavy metals. So, Richard, what is your opinion on this? Because I know you have some regolith work experience as well.
Well, it's just when you mentioned the large habitat, it kind of changes everything, right? But when we have inflatable habs, it changes the way we can think about things. So like Colin's been teaching me about these Winogradsky columns, ways of like essentially creating these like chambers where you can pass liquids through different like rhizospheres of soil or regolith in this context. And essentially you can then optimize the microbial community into these different chambers, and then you can leach out the different metals. And this is a way to kind of clean water and extract metals from like metal contaminated lands on Earth. But the same type of systems could be done in space. So then the question is like, what is the purpose of the moon base and what are we trying to do there? So if we're trying to like manufacture and build things, extracting certain metals in this kind of like leaching type system could be really valuable for making 3D printing metal food stocks. As a crop scientist, I'm interested in micronutrients, but and maybe there's opportunity to get some of the micronutrients that the plants need. And for me, like the final thing is then it comes back to water. In order to do this type of like leachate approach to try and like clean the regolith, you need water. And so there's the classic tug of war for the reason for going to the moon. If it is just a stopping stone to go to Mars, that water, a lot of it's going to be used for making methane, for making the fuel, depending on which type of rocket you take, right? And so there's going to be a real like tug of war for that, because in my opinion, because there's finite resources even there. And so is the water going to be more valuable for rocket fuel to go to Mars? Or is that water going to be more valuable to keep pushing through biology, to accumulate organic matter, to make a habitat which can grow to build a sustainable community and an ecosystem? So I've gone off a bit of a tangent because I want to loop back to the water and the minerals. But I'm not sure I answered the question about like the regolith and the remediation. And the key to that is just the need to water. But I'm not the pro regolith remediation. Harrison's no doubt knows some details that I missed. Over to you, sir.
Yes, Harrison. Perfect segue. So what do you think are those solutions to improve lunar regolith for crop production that Richard gave you the ball for?
Yeah, I think on Earth we have a pretty good model that organic matter binds heavy metals pretty well in terrestrial soils. So like because we lack organic matter on the lunar surface, as we add that in, it's going to bind a lot of that. And it's really going to slow down how much the plant is probably going to take up. Now, with that being said, I think it has become very common to get a lunar simulant and then add biology to it, like without doing anything. And like what Jared was saying just a minute ago, I think that we don't really know how these phases are going to be immediately reactive to water, but they need to be very heavily leached and washed and stuff, maybe even a light acid processing. So before doing that, before adding your biology, like go ahead and wash them really well, add your biology in, and then it'll start kind of getting all together.
Yeah, so Harrison, actually, Doug had an interesting suggestion. What about couldn't we keep, so to speak, this fine abrasive regolith out of the hab by, so to speak, grinding them outside of the module and then bringing them in? Is that could that be a solution?
Yeah, I think it could. I think that's a great idea, Doug. And I would love to see like some of these commercial missions literally be for returning, larger amounts of lunar material like that could be purchased and really used because right now if you need it from NASA, they're going to give you like milligrams, which makes sense, right? But yeah, like let's bring back some of that material. And while we're there, let's plop some plants in and start growing them. But yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we
So
start a company on that.
so Jared, back to you. And this is a question from Brian Grandin. Especially, I think we were just talking about the importance of water. So Brian is asking if there are any experimental or modeling results on how liquid water actually moves or fails to move through lunar regolith under lunar gravity or microgravity.
Really good question, and not that I'm aware of. We see there is a lot of anecdotal stuff, though. I'm not able to offer quantitative information on this. It may be out there. I'm not aware of it. Um, when you water the regolith, and we've done some plant growth experiments in our lab, when you water the simulant, it compacts it a lot. And what regolith and regolith simulants are a really good plug. So they can, when they're compacted, they resist flow. The material does not retain water. In theory, well, on Earth, we do groundwater modeling through very low porosity media all the time. So this is possible. I don't know anyone that's run those simulations, or if they have run the simulations, validate them with experiments, especially in reduced gravity. However, NASA and I know the European Space Agency has their own reduced flight experimentation capability. I'm a bit less familiar with that, but I know NASA's flight opportunity, and yes, Richard, but Richard can speak to that. But NASA has the Flight Opportunities Program, FOP, which offers researchers the ability to propose and develop, propose, ideally get funding, and then fly payloads on suborbital rocket flights or parabolic flights. The challenge would be with a parabolic flight, you're not going to have a lot of time to do a water flow study, so it would need to be something probably easier done as far as the timing is concerned on a suborbital flight. And right now, NASA does not have a suborbital flight provider or a parabolic flight provider, but those are being worked on, I'm told. So, anyway,
Yeah. So Jared, we have been talking quite a bit of regolith. Sorry, Richard, you wanted to add something?
Well, I just opened the link to just opened to the chat a link to the NASA Physical Science Open Science repository, in which there were some experiments were done on plant water management on the International Space Station, and from Professor Weigel, brilliant water physicist, and basically they've got a bowl control system. So he was able to show that hydroponics can work in true microgravity, and then there was modeling to show that if you can get the water to flow like that in true microgravity, it can also work on a lunar gravity. So just kind of reflecting on, it looks like humanity has created the technology to get the water moving in a normal way in microgravity and lunar gravity. So that's kind of like really exciting. But the fractional gravity component, again, was the other thing that Jad was referring to. And so, yeah, the wonderful work by the European Modular Cultivation System and the team that built that hardware has provided a centrifuge in orbit that's allowed people to do studies at lunar and Martian gravity. And they've provided some interesting hints that circadian rhythm will be altered and that response to red and blue light might be altered. So those kind of preliminary studies do give space agronomists some interesting concepts, such as controlling the light to reduce some of the impact of the gravity effect. It's kind of cool. So thanks to ESA for that series of experiments, and I look forward to the next flight hardware that you guys develop, because that one had some really great controls built into it. So yeah, it's over.
Awesome. Great point there, Richard. And I think, Jared, I'll stick with you for another question. We have been talking about regolith as a substrate to grow plants, but let's move away from growing plants. what lunar resources do you think will be the most valuable for for the human presence on the moon? What are we looking for? What are you looking for on the human surface?
It's a very good question, and it depends who you ask and what you're trying to do. Um, for me, I'm looking at the bit shorter term. I mentioned that we need to be able to do in situ resource utilization to extract metals, do manufacturing to actually build things, repair, build part. If a rover wheel breaks, we could actually 3D print one using lunar regolith. I think that kind of stuff is extremely important. But that's not the first step. To me, the most valuable resource on the moon is the regolith itself. Just raw, untreated, pick it up, scoop it up from the ground, regolith. It's what we're going to be, it's our fundamental building material for the moon. We're going to be making launch and landing pads out of it, berms to help mitigate plume surface interactions when a rocket comes down. Build up a berm around your landing area. You block some of that hypersonic dust that is going to get ejected as the rocket comes down, protecting all of your stuff and everyone else's stuff that's around it there. We're going to be possibly going to be using it for thermal and radiation shielding on habitats. Largely unprepared. For landing pads and things, yes, we're probably going to be sintering it together to increase strength. But that first thing is just the raw regolith as your fundamental construction material. We always think of it as such a fluffy, hard to drive in, your wheels sink in it, easy to slip wheels, and if you slip one wheel, you slip another and another and another, and then you're stuck. The stuff is actually quite an interesting engineering material, it turns out. If you can compact it through methods like vibration, you can actually change the properties of it so it becomes a very compact, nearly concrete-like surface in terms of bearing strength. So you can actually put foundations, landing pads, heavier rovers with greater traction if you can manipulate the material. So yeah, it's the regolith and the ability to actually manipulate it to get it to do what you want, which there's been tons of studies, including in my lab, that show that you can actually leverage that material as an engineering material. So I think just regolith.
Yes, and you know, there's like multiple companies now trying to mine different elements out of the moon surface, right? Like helium-3 and so on. So it's going to be quite interesting to see all of this playing out. And we are on the last 15 minutes of our webinar series. I will ask Harrison, Jared, and Richard like a very big overview question. But please, Harrison, Jared, Richard, could do me a favor and start answering some of the questions that you see in the chat that we may not have time to go through, if you find it appropriate. But Richard, I'll go to you and ask a question because you always have like a very interesting perspective of all of this. If you could prioritize one experiment that absolutely must be performed on the lunar surface before we establish a permanent settlement, what would that be and why?
Germinating seeds. Just life evolved on Earth in the Earth's protective magnetic field with one gravity, 1G present, right? When we're going to the moon, we've been skimming some of that gravity. We're also getting outside of that electromagnetic field. So when you look at like the germinating seed, like when you add water to it, you may have looked really closely at it, and maybe you've tried to imagine what's happening inside. But that root tip, that radical on the embryo, is trying to push its way out. And that's then going to start touching like regolith or water or whatever it is that you're growing in. So that moment when that's coming out, about 9 minutes, as it's first poking its head out of the tester, that protective coat, there's a load of genes that are really highly expressed in that root tip, in the RAM, the root apical meristem. And those genes, a lot of them respond to both galactic-cosmic ray simulations and a null electromagnetic field. So essentially, I'm saying there's a synergy of two different environmental stresses that occur on the lunar surface, and the genes that respond to them are at this very sensitive stage of development, okay? So that's the thing about the first people to germinate seeds on the moon. Congratulations, China. The Chang'e rover on the dark side was a brilliant scientific achievement for humanity. And the photo that came back of the plants in there, as a plant scientist, I was a little bit disappointed. I think they could have probably got a better angle. Maybe, it didn't really look like a cotton plant, but I believe the scientists and their integrity, right? So they had a cotton plant that was growing there. But they said in the manuscript, there was Arabidopsis and Brassica rapa and other seed species that they had in there too. You couldn't see any evidence of those in the photos, right? In the
It
paper,
was very hard to see much of it, which is still a tiny bit cryptic to me.
So I put it to you that they didn't germinate. Cotton is actually a notoriously difficult seed to keep dormant. We sent it to the space station during Project TikTok. We had to keep the samples warm at like roughly 10 degrees C because if you put them down to 4, they'd die. So those seeds, they didn't really get cold. They didn't get down to 4. And so that kind of temperature on orbit, on the way to the moon, those cotton seeds were probably already growing. So the more of the story is, I think humanity needs to know that all seed varieties, these small ones, are going to germinate before we start to build an ecosystem that requires the plants to grow and thrive and produce the food and nutritional and psychological support. Because wouldn't that be tragic? You send those astronauts up there, and the first you have, they put their seeds in, and then none of them grow, none of them die, and they all start to grow weakly and die because of this very simple concept. We can put a force field around. We could put an electromagnetic field just in the chamber. There's many ways we can overcome that challenge if we know that it's real. So for me, yeah, just germinating seeds on the lunar surface and then looking at the microbial interactions. But that's it. So,
yeah, that's a lovely answer, and we cannot wait to hear more updates about Leaf whenever those come out. So, we wish you best of luck on Leaf, and that is a very exciting experiment. And obviously, before the session is over, please, Harrison, Richard, Jared, if anybody would like to follow up with you with any questions, feel free to share whatever email you may want those questions to be sent to, because I imagine there will be a lot of follow-up questions that people may have. But Harrison, now that same question for you. If you could prioritize one experiment that must absolutely be done on the lunar surface before we establish a permanent settlement, what will it be and why?
Yeah. I would love to basically recreate like the Mars White Chemistry Lab experiment on the moon. Like let us maybe we can do a little bit more spatial sampling and we can dig a soil profile and then we can look at that development through the layers. But I would love to just be able to scoop that regolith, mix it with some water. If we get really fancy, maybe we can like do a little pH control, do some time series leaching, see what ions are coming out in solution. And then sort of be able to like dry that solution down, right? Like we believe that that initial reaction with water might be pretty funky and kind of lead to some things being generated. So if we can allow that to sort of just dry down, like what are we going to be left with? And sort of like as Jared was saying, like regolith is our best friend, like how can we utilize that as some sort of material for our benefit, right? Whether that's to directly feedback as a fertilizer for growing plants, or if it's a construction material or like a binder, I really want to know what that is. And then once we leach all of it, of course, we'll drop a plant in it and we'll just grow that plant up. So that's what I would do. Pretty much want to make this happen at any cost. So all of
Yeah.
you out there, let's do it.
And going back to Richard and Harrison about the importance of plants, I guess like historically, even from the Apollo missions, plants were the guinea pigs about what the toxicity of the lunar surface was, right? Because once they brought back those regolith samples from the Apollo missions, the first things that they did was to wrap them right on plants and see what the effect will be, right? So it will be almost very, like almost like a full circle. About that was the first thing that we tested the toxicity of the regolith on, and now we're bringing it back to stay. So I think it will be very, very poetical almost.
although there
Yeah,
was
go ahead.
accidental exposure of Harrison Schmitt. So he was the last Apollo astronaut to go to the moon, and he was a geologist.
Yeah.
I had the honor of meeting him at the ASGSR conference, the American Society of Gravity Space Research. So if you guys aren't a member, you should really come. It's a really great conference. They have people like Harrison Schmitt to come. And I had him talk. He was talking about when he went into the return capsule, he took the helmet off, and because he had fallen over on the lunar surface, his suit was covered in regolith, and so he actually got some in his eyes. And I've seen the video footage; they look really bloodshot. It didn't look pleasant, but they didn't have the biomedical protocols in place to like study it and him at that moment. But I think in this next trip to the moon, that type of accident probably won't happen. But if it did, we'd have those protocols in place to make sure we really understand how the human biology was responding. But you're right. We're really lucky the Open Science Archive recently got access to that old archive data from the Johnson Space Center. So again, we should link to that because I know it's a wealth of knowledge from the bygone era of Apollo. No, okay.
Absolutely, and expect a publication very soon from those data coming up. And as Richard said, the raw data of all of that is available and has been greatly curated by the people at Johnson Space Center. So thank you very much to them for that. And yeah, Rich, I remember especially that picture of Gene Cernan full of dust everywhere, and I think I forgot who was on the command model, but basically made them strip completely naked before they got back into it, just because they were so full of dust. But yeah, there's so much. We could stay here for hours talking about the history of all of this. But Jared, and I will ask this question as well to you. If you could prioritize one experiment that must actually be performed on the lunar surface before we establish a permanent settlement, what will it be and why? And I imagine your response will be slightly different from Richard and Harrison.
It is. And Harrison, I noticed in the chat you put your contact info, but it only went to the hosts and panelists.
My bad. Okay, thank you.
I almost did the same thing. So anyway, just one experiment. I have trouble just picking.
You can propose more. We're okay.
Okay.
I'll allow it.
So,
I'll give you more money to do them.
So if I could choose a payload, just one lander, one rover with a few instruments, it would be, and I won't prescribe specific instruments, but the measurements I would want are the shear strength and bearing strength of the regolith, as well as not proxy, but corroborating measurements of things like the thermal conductivity. A more compacted regolith is going to transfer heat better, for example. So measurements to cross-validate that we see. If we see high strength, we can assume a compacted regolith, but not always. Yet if you have a correlated higher thermal conductivity or electrical conductivity,
and that will be important to set up a settlement, right? Like to know those measurements that the regolith could be used to do that.
Correct. That the site you're at can support the loads, whether that's infrastructure, rovers, large landers, what have you. So to me, I would do a kind of a physical properties characterization payload suite, largely focused on understanding the mechanical strength. Now, obviously, that's my research, that's my bias, but that's what I would do.
And there's definitely you don't have a grant out there with something like that proposed, right?
There's a couple of proposals in similar to that, yes. Fingers crossed.
Awesome. And then we're approaching the last 3 minutes, and I will still like to give you guys a tiny bit of room, especially for any young scientists that may be joining and want to follow career paths such as yours. What could be a good starting point, or what they can do to help in these endeavors? Richard, I'll start with you.
And also to reflect on that, so the best advice we can give is also an answer to another couple of questions in there, which is, how do people contribute to this? There's many different types of regolith out there. There's many different types of experiments, different tissues you can look at. Where to begin? And one of the most important things is making sure that when you do a study, you have enough metadata that you're accumulating, so that when you present your primary data, be it the growth of a plant or whatever amount of ions you got out of your regolith, that there's enough detailed description of all the factors that contributed to that other people can understand how you did your experiment. Sometimes okay, it's obvious, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes everything that's obvious to you, you might miss something which is obvious to someone else. And so this is why I became such a big fan of the NASA Open Science Data Archive. In there are regolith studies that researchers have already done. And what you can do, you can go then, you can download their metadata tables. And you can look at all the different environmental variables or concepts that they thought were important in order to understand their primary results. So doing that, you can create your own metadata table that describes exactly how you conducted your regolith experiment so that it is compatible with the other regolith studies that are in the Open Science Data Archive. Because yeah, you don't want to miss the most important thing, right? And so often the best place to start if you're new is mining that is literature. And in this case, what I learned was actually it wasn't the primary data that was the most important thing to mine. In the end, it turned out it was the metadata, because that then determined how I would conduct my experiments moving forwards in the lab, so that my data was comparable to the other people in the field. So yeah, that's kind of responding to Kristen. A couple people were talking about some of the open science and the kind of need for like standardization. And I think this is kind of echoing some of the concepts that Jared and those guys wrote in their awesome paper on this. So if that should also be dropped in as a link to those said future or current citizen scientists and researchers, so that way they can also implement any device that was in that particular paper that but again, personally, I always take a data-driven approach, and so mining the Open Science Archive and having that available to the community has just been priceless. Yes, so yeah, that's my little reflection on that. Over.
Yeah, and following with that, myself and Jared probably he will say the same thing. We have a newly open OSDR working group regarding regolith, so everybody is welcome to join. And we use a lot of data that was curated by Chris Pitch, that is here in the attendees, and we cannot thank her enough. All the work that she did, going through all of those old materials, which is unbelievable story. I can't wait to publish that out with some of that material. But Jared, since I mentioned you, any words of advice for younger scientists to be involved in this research?
Passion for it is first in everything. Scientific research, no matter what field you're in, space or any field, it's not always the easiest. There's a lot of ups and downs, and you've got to make sure that you're passionate enough about something to keep going through the hard parts. When you just can't figure out a problem, trust in yourself that you can figure it out, do the work. It's hard day after day. These problems we're trying to solve, they're not solved in a day, they're not solved in a week, they're often not solved in 5 years or more. And it takes a lot of tries. So be resilient, be comfortable with failure, frankly. That's a bit of a harsh word, but it doesn't need to be. You can't learn without trying a bunch of different things and knowing what doesn't work. And every time you learn, every time you fail forward. You use what you have done before to inform the future. So resilience, know you can do hard things, and most importantly, be passionate about it, because without that passion, you can't do hard things. And like Richard was saying, and like Borja said, there is a lot of open activity in the community. The Open Science Data Repository, OSDR, has a lot of working groups that cover pretty much every topic you could be interested in here.
Yeah.
And yes, plug for our new Regolith group. But there's a lot of opportunities like that. And often for students, if you have a local university nearby and you can Google these professors, and professors are some of the least scary people that you can actually meet most of the time. A lot of them are interested in mentoring younger people, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a professor, like just a research scientist like me, often interested in, growing that next generation. So don't be afraid to talk to people either. The worst thing anyone can do is say no.
Absolutely. And following up with that, for the NASA OSDR, Ryan Scott helps manage a lot of that, so he's a fantastic resource as well. He will be able to help if there's any questions. And last but not least, we have one of our leads for the last Moon Village Association working group. Harrison, any words of advice for people that would like to be involved in this kind of research?
Yeah. I think it's kind of building off of Jared, like passion is everything. And it's really easy to be passionate about space and also to get other people. Like that is like we're very fortunate to be in a field where it doesn't take much convincing. So yeah, like cold call, like put yourself out there, say you want to do this stuff. If there's a prof or there's a graduate student you want to work with, just be like, "Hey, I want to do space research," right? But more than anything is uh just like don't be afraid to like really try out experiments and stuff if you can. You know what I mean? Like do your backyard research, do your home, like research, right? Like I'm a bit of a lab monster. I feel like I've generated like so much data that I'll probably never publish and everything, but it means so much to me and it really fueled my heart going forward. So just do it. Like don't be afraid. Um, and lastly, like the space community in particular is so collaborative and cool. Like we all work together very well. You make friends everywhere you go. And pick your champions and like work with them and like let them lead you, you know what I mean? And like great things will happen. But like Nate Argroves is here, Borja's been like an amazing mentor to me, like people have really helped me find how to like advance and it just happens if you're willing to play the game and like be cool and it makes it super enjoyable. So get ready to work alongside other great people and make something cool happen. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, and Nate is here, so one day we'll have to have him speak about Martian and lunar beer, which will be necessary for psychological purposes. But
For
as I
sure.
mentioned, Harrison is one of the leads of the Moon Village Association Agriculture Working Group. The link to join the MBA, I think I posted early on. Please, there's a lot of working groups as well that are fantastic. Giuseppe Rivaldi, that is the president, I think he's in this call right now as well. He's a fantastic resource and with a lot of history in space flight. Glavki, thank you very much for setting all of this up. And I would like to say as well that the Moon Village Association has an International Moon Day and people can host events until October 31st. So if there's any more, thank you, Glavki. There's like a link over there if you're interested in International Moon Day. And again, people can host events until October 31st. I cannot thank enough Richard, Jared, and Harrison for being here with me today. I knew this was going to be fun. I knew we could be here for like the next 2 hours, keep talking about this. But I know you guys are super busy, and I really appreciate that you guys were here with your incredible insights regarding all of this. So thank you very much for everybody. Take care and see you all soon.
Thank you, Borja.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Borja. Thank you, Rich.